Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Garage Biljon and to my 924 Turbo. You have seen this car on my channel before, but this is the first video I'm making on this car in this format. The other ones were basically silent movies. So what has to happen to this car is a whole bunch of things that are basically unrelated, but they are important to be done because I'm taking this car on a roughly 2,000 kilometer road trip within the next week. So what I'll be tackling in this episode is I'm going to be replacing the gearbox mounts at the back because they are worn out. I'll also try and do the motor mounts because I firmly believe that when you do gearbox mounts, you should do motor mounts because they all work together as a whole. So I've got originals for the back and I've got originals for the front, which is a very rare thing nowadays because they don't make the fronts anymore. But I managed to find them new old stock from a supplier. So I'll try and get that done. The other thing I want to do is this window regulator here has stopped working. Like I said in the previous video, I did fix this a year ago and it was way better, but now I think the motor actually has died, but I have to open up the door to know. And the last thing I want to do is I'm going to replace the spark plugs. I replaced them last year with a set of iridium spark plugs, and I don't think the car actually likes them. I hear a bit of a knocking sound when I'm at full throttle. I think the iridium spark plugs are just not igniting the fuel the way it should be. It might be down to the fact that my system is not geared up for iridium, I don't know. So I'm going back to the standard plugs, and changing plugs on a turbo is a bit of a bitch because they're not very easily accessible, but I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to get the car in the air, and when you join me again, we can start working on the gearbox. Alright, she's in the air and ready for me to start working on, so let me show you what we're going to do first. The first thing we're going to do is install these two gearbox mounts. This is original Porsche. They were not available for a long time, but they are now again available from Porsche. The difference between this and the normally aspirated 94 is that the suspension at the back of the turbo is different. So this actually sits on top of the torsion tube, which has these arms sticking out almost like a Beetle used to, whereas with the normal 924 they hang from the body. So we'll be putting these in first, and if I have time I want to do these as well. These are also brand new motor mounts for a 924 turbo. Left hand side is just solid rubber and the right hand side has a spring in it. So we'll see if we can get those installed. This is a bit fiddly, especially this guy, because it's right next to the turbo and there's a lot of plating that you have to remove. I have done this before with the engine in the car, so I know it can be done, but it's not fun to do. But this should not be too difficult, so I think let's get under the car and get started on this job. Alright, so we are now at the bottom of the 924. You can see the difference already from the Safari or even the 968. And that is that this is what they call a snail shell gearbox. This is the 5-speed gearbox that they fitted to the 924 turbos. And if you had the optional 5-speed before 1980, you also had this guy, and it's a dogleg gearbox. But the difference I was talking about just now is the fact that you've got this additional arm that sits on your torsion tube here, and this arm is where your gearbox mount sits on top of. So we will support the gearbox from the bottom here. I'll just probably put a stump or something in here together with the jack, and then we'll just make sure that she doesn't drop down, and that should allow us to get these two gearbox mounts out. Alright, I've got the first one out. This is the new gearbox mount, and you can see it's a solid thing, and this is the one that came out of it. It's completely worn out. So I think this should make a big difference in how the car goes through a corner. Anyway, you saw it was fairly easy to do, so I'm going to get this one in, get the other one in, and then we have ticked off one thing from the list. All right, so we've got the transmission now completed. That job's done, which means we can move on to the next job. And because it's really hot today, I think I'm going to start on this window regulator. And what we need to do first is strip down this door. And it's something I always hate to do because these door cards are not in the best of shape. In the past they got wet, so they're very, very, very fragile. All right, so you guys see this little fuse here by my fingertip, number 8 on the auxiliary fuse panel. That is the power windows fuse. I wanted to just double check that there's one fuse and not one for left and one for right, but it's just one, and this fuse is perfectly intact. So I think we need to go look for the problem elsewhere. So let's start with stripping off this door card and all of the paraphernalia, and then we'll get to the regulator that sits behind it. Okay, so I've got the door card off together with the protective film that I put on last year. So this is the mechanism inside the door. You can see this is quite different from the way it was for the Safari. On the Safari we had the mechanism right in that hole, but this is an electric window, so I don't know what's wrong with this. It's not even clicking. So this little motor is what makes the window mechanism go up and down, and you can see there's a connector there, and if we scan, there's another connector at the back here. So I'm quickly going to disconnect this from the car and then put a multimeter across them and make sure we are getting power to this motor. All right, that's one down. Let's get the one on the back. I know these were terrible to get back on when I took it apart the first time. So that's number 2 gone. All right, so I've hooked up the battery again. Let me just take off these little caps. And in theory, we should now see 12 volt coming down. This is going to be tough. Let me just get this connected first. Okay. Stay. This is going to give you fun. All right, we're going to do this differently. So I'm going to just pop this in there and hold it there with my hand if I can, and this one as well, like this. And now, all right, so this is a bit precarious, but it should work. And if I now push the switch, yeah, I'm seeing 12 volts. So we know the motor is getting power. So I've got a bit of an issue with this motor not working because this window is fully extended, obviously, so it's all the way to the top, and that means there's no way for me to get this mechanism out of the door. Even if I released all of the screws here, it's going to be very, very difficult to get out. So I'm going to try something which might backfire, which might not, and that is I'm actually going to take out the motor in situ. I think I can do it. I honestly can't remember. So I'm going to try it, and if it doesn't work, well, then I find another solution. But that's the only way I can imagine that I can now get this mechanism out, because it's fully extended and I need to squeeze it through one of these holes. So I have to somehow find a way of collapsing it. I think that's the only way to do it, is to actually just remove the motor. So what I'll do, just to be safe, is I'm gonna put some duct tape on the glass so that it doesn't drop down, and then I should be able to safely pull this guy out of its spot, hopefully. Let's see. Alright, so it's out of the mechanism, so I think we need to check whether this motor is dead or not. So the easiest way to do that is just hook it up to these connectors again. But first, let's connect the battery again. Let's just pop that on there. This one goes there. Doesn't have to be all the way on, just as long as it's a little bit on, we can test it. Ah, the motor works. All right, that's good news. So the motor is fine, which means this mechanism is frozen for some reason. So we're getting closer. All right, so I think now that we know that the motor works, the power works, the last thing that this can be is that somehow this thing has rusted. I don't know how that's possible, but that's the only thing I can think of. So I'm going to take off the tape and I'm going to see if I can move the window up and down and see why it's stuck. It doesn't make any sense to me, but anyway, we'll see. So that goes off and this goes off. Just pop that somewhere. There we go. And now let's see if we can, here we go. The mechanism itself seems fine. This is all okay. Alright, now I'm even more confused. Now I do not understand what's going on here. Okay, so whatever was holding it seems to have now worked its way loose. Alright, let's tape it back up again and see if we can make it work. Alright, so motor's in, battery's connected again, so let's see if we can get this guy to work again. There we go. I honestly do not know what was wrong with this window, but it's fixed again. Alright, just one last touch and the door is complete again. And I've connected the battery up again to just make sure it's still working. So let's have a look. Yes. Alright. We'll pop that in the door and then we are done. Perfect. Alright, so that leaves us with two jobs, and that is replacing the spark plugs on the turbo, and as you can see they are very much obscured by the charge tube itself, and to replace the motor mounts, of which you can see the two nuts down there. The problem I have is I thought I have all the spares that I need to do this, and I actually just discovered I do not. So I need to go pick them up tomorrow, which means that this is where I'm going to end this video on my 924 Turbo. I hope you guys liked what you saw, and if you did, please think about subscribing. So the next video will still be on the 924 Turbo, and then when I return from Le Mans, we will pick up the work on the 968 again, because then I expect that wiring harness for the starter and alternator to have arrived. So, until next time, goodbye.